The North Atlantic, March 17, 1943. Korvettenkapitän Hans-Georg Hess stood in the conning tower of U-995, scanning the horizon through salt-crusted binoculars. The waves rolled grey and endless under a sky the color of wet concrete. Somewhere out there, beyond the murk, was convoy HX-229, 50 merchant ships carrying fuel, tanks, aircraft, and ammunition from New York to Liverpool. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Hess had been hunting convoys for 2 years. He knew the mathematics of this war better than he knew his own family's faces. Sink the ships faster than the Allies could replace them. That was the strategy. Admiral Dönitz himself had explained it in the officers' mess at Lorient. 700,000 tons per month. Sink that much Allied shipping, and Britain would starve. The war would end. Hess had done his part. In 23 months of operations, he'd sent 11 Allied freighters to the bottom. Each one had taken ammunition away from British guns, food from British tables, fuel from British tanks. Each sinking was a small victory in a war of attrition that Germany was winning. Or so they'd been told. Through the binoculars, Hess spotted smoke on the horizon, then masts, then hulls, the convoy. He ordered the boat to dive and positioned U-995 for an attack run. The plan was standard. Wait for nightfall, surface, fire torpedoes from close range, dive before the escorts could respond. He'd done it dozens of times. What Korvettenkapitän Hess didn't know, what no U-boat commander in the Atlantic knew in March of 1943, was that the war had already been lost. Not lost in the traditional sense, with armies surrendering and cities falling, but lost in a more fundamental way. The mathematics that had seemed so favorable, so simple, so inevitable were wrong. The Americans weren't just replacing the ships Germany sank, they were building new ones at a rate that defied everything German naval intelligence believed possible. While Hess calculated tonnages and planned his attacks, American shipyards were producing cargo vessels faster than Germany could sink them. Much faster. The story of how German U-boat commanders never learned the truth about American shipbuilding is a story about the limits of intelligence, the power of industrial capacity, and the fatal miscalculations that can decide wars. It's about how Admiral Karl Dönitz's tonnage war strategy, which seemed mathematically sound in Berlin, crumbled against a reality that German officers simply couldn't comprehend until it was far too late. This is the story of how the United States built a merchant fleet large enough to win the war, one ship at a time, faster than anyone thought humanly possible. When Admiral Karl Dönitz took command of Germany's U-boat arm in 1939, he understood naval warfare as a mathematical problem. The equation was brutally simple. Britain was an island nation that imported 50 million tons of goods annually. Cut off those supplies, and Britain would collapse. Surface ships couldn't do it. The Royal Navy was too powerful. But submarines could slip past the blockade, strike merchant convoys, and disappear into the Atlantic's depths. Dönitz had calculated exactly what Germany needed: 300 U-boats operating simultaneously. With that force, he could maintain a constant presence across the Atlantic shipping lanes. Some boats would be on patrol, some returning to base, some being repaired, but there would always be enough submarines at sea to sink 700,000 tons of Allied shipping per month. That number, 700,000 tons, wasn't arbitrary. Dönitz's intelligence staff had analyzed British imports, shipbuilding capacity, and replacement rates. They concluded that if Germany could consistently sink more tonnage than Britain could replace, Allied shipping strength would gradually decline. Within 2 years, perhaps 3, Britain's merchant marine would be so depleted that the island would face starvation and industrial collapse. The strategy had a name: Tonnage Krieg, the Tonnage War. The enemy's shipping constitutes one single great whole. Dönitz wrote in 1942, "It is therefore immaterial where a ship is sunk, Once it has been destroyed, it has to be replaced by a new ship. The logic seemed flawless. Germany didn't need to control sea lanes or win decisive naval battles. It just needed to sink ships consistently, relentlessly, until Britain ran out of vessels to replace them. It was attrition warfare in its purest form, a race between destruction and construction. But Dönitz's equation contained a fatal assumption. His intelligence estimates of Allied shipbuilding capacity were based on traditional methods, the way ships had always been built, with skilled shipwrights working from the keel up, riveting steel plates one at a time. Under those methods, Britain could build perhaps 200,000 tons of new shipping per month. Add American capacity, and the total might reach 300,000 tons. 700,000 tons sunk versus 300,000 tons built. Germany would win the race. The assumption seemed reasonable in September of 1939 when the war began. At that time, the United States operated shipyards designed for peacetime production. Building a cargo ship took 8 to 10 months using traditional methods. Skilled workers were scarce. Steel allocations were limited. The entire American shipbuilding industry produced fewer than 100 vessels annually. Dönitz's staff knew about American industrial capacity. They weren't fools, but they assumed shipbuilding couldn't be accelerated beyond certain limits. You couldn't just build ships like automobiles. Ships were complex, massive, requiring specialized craftsmanship and careful construction. Each one was essentially unique, built from the keel up according to specifications. That's how it had always been done. That's how the Germans did it. That's how everyone did it. What Dönitz and his intelligence officers didn't anticipate was that the Americans would change the rules. In December of 1940, while France had fallen and Britain fought alone, a 60-year-old industrialist named Henry John Kaiser received a contract from the British government to build 30 cargo ships. Kaiser had never built a ship in his life. He'd made his fortune constructing dams. Hoover Dam, Bonneville Dam, Grand Coulee Dam. He knew concrete and steel, construction schedules, and workforce management, but he knew nothing about shipyards. His competitors in the established shipbuilding industry were delighted. They'd told the Maritime Commission that Kaiser was unqualified, that ships required specialized knowledge, that giving him a contract would waste time and resources. Let the amateurs fail, and then the real shipbuilders could get on with the work. Kaiser, however, didn't approach shipbuilding as a traditional craft. He approached it as a construction project, and construction projects had one overriding goal: finish on time and under budget. The British needed ships desperately. German U-boats were sinking them faster than British yards could replace them. Speed mattered more than elegance. Kaiser studied the basic Liberty ship design the Maritime Commission had developed. It was a simple, utilitarian freighter based on a British tramp steamer. Nothing fancy, just a steel hull with cargo holds and a steam engine. 441 feet long, 57 feet wide, capable of carrying 10,000 tons of cargo at 11 knots. The design deliberately avoided innovation. It used a reciprocating steam engine, a technology from the 19th century, because those engines were simple to manufacture and didn't require specialized parts. The hull used flat steel plates, welded together, rather than the complex curved plates that made ships more hydrodynamic. Everything about the Liberty ship sacrificed performance for buildability. Kaiser saw something that traditional shipbuilders had missed. This simple design could be mass-produced. He'd watched Henry Ford's assembly lines produce automobiles in Detroit. He'd seen how prefabrication and standardization could dramatically accelerate construction. What if ships could be built the same way? Not as individual craft, but as standardized products assembled from interchangeable parts. The idea seemed absurd to traditional shipbuilders. Ships weren't cars. They were too large, too complex, too dependent on skilled craftsmanship. But Kaiser wasn't constrained by shipbuilding tradition. He was a dam builder who saw a construction problem and applied construction solutions. In December of 1940, he broke ground on his first shipyard in Richmond, California. The yard didn't exist when he won the contract. He built it from scratch on undeveloped land along the San Francisco Bay. Within months, he'd opened additional yards in Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver, Washington. Traditional shipyards built ships one at a time, from the keel up. Kaiser's yards would work differently. The ships would be constructed in sections, pre-fabricated modules built simultaneously in different parts of the yard, then welded together on the slipway. It was the same principle as assembling a dam. Break the project into manageable pieces, work on everything at once, then put it together at the end. The method required welding rather than riveting. Traditional shipbuilders preferred rivets. They were proven, reliable, and allowed for some flex in the hull. Welding was newer, faster, but less trusted. Kaiser didn't care about tradition. Welding was faster, required less skilled labor, and created stronger joints. His ships would be welded. He recruited workers from across the United States, farmers from Oklahoma, miners from Montana, housewives from California. Most had never seen a ship, let alone built one. It didn't matter. Kaiser designed the construction process so that unskilled workers could be trained quickly on specific tasks. You didn't need to understand the entire ship, just your section of it. The first Liberty ship, Kaiser's Richmond yard, built, took 244 days from keel laying to launch. It was slower than traditional yards, and Kaiser's critics felt vindicated. The amateur was failing, just as they'd predicted. But Kaiser was learning. His second ship took 193 days. His fifth took 149. His 10th took 95. With each ship, the workers became more efficient. The prefabrication improved. The assembly process smoothed out. By mid-1941, Kaiser's yards were launching ships in 60 days. The established shipbuilding industry stopped laughing. In Germany, naval intelligence noted the increase in American production, but didn't revise their fundamental estimates. The Americans were ramping up, yes, but there were limits to how fast ships could be built. The intelligence assessments assumed American production would stabilize around 50 ships per month by 1943. That would add perhaps 300,000 tons monthly to Allied capacity, significant but manageable. The U-boat arm just needed to sink more ships. Dönitz pushed for increased U-boat production, more aggressive Wolfpack tactics, better torpedoes. The solution to growing Allied shipbuilding was simple. Sink more tonnage. What German intelligence didn't grasp, what they couldn't grasp because it had never been done before, was that Kaiser's methods were scalable in ways traditional shipbuilding wasn't. By December of 1941, when the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor, Kaiser operated 7 major shipyards on the West Coast. His yards alone were building ships at a rate that exceeded the total output of the entire American shipbuilding industry 2 years earlier. And he was still accelerating. The Maritime Commission, seeing Kaiser's success, adopted his methods as the standard for the entire national shipbuilding program. 18 shipyards across the United States began building Liberty ships using prefabrication, welding, and assembly line techniques. The government coordinated production so that parts built in one state could be shipped to yards in another. Steel mills, engine manufacturers, and equipment suppliers all synchronized their output to feed the shipyards. It was mass production on a scale that had never been applied to ships. By 1942, American shipyards were launching an average of 3 Liberty ships every single day. German U-boat commanders in the Atlantic had no idea. They knew American production was increasing. Captured documents and radio intercepts mentioned new ships regularly, but the numbers they heard seemed impossible. Intelligence reports were dismissed as Allied propaganda or calculation errors. Ships couldn't be built that fast. It violated everything German naval officers knew about shipbuilding. Korvettenkapitän Hess, hunting convoy HX-229 in March of 1943, had been briefed that American production was perhaps 40 ships per month. That matched his experience. He'd sunk 11 ships in 2 years, and other U-boats were sinking similar numbers. The mathematics still seemed to favor Germany. What Hess didn't know was that in March of 1943 alone, American shipyards would launch 98 Liberty ships, in April 112, in May 121. The Americans weren't just replacing losses, they were expanding their merchant fleet while simultaneously replacing everything the U-boats sank. The tonnage war that Dönitz had calculated so carefully was already over. Germany had lost, and most U-boat commanders wouldn't realize it until the war ended. The symbol of American shipbuilding supremacy came in November of 1942, when Kaiser's Richmond Yard No. 2 set out to prove what the new methods could achieve under ideal conditions. The challenge came from Kaiser's own Oregon shipyard, which had built a Liberty ship called the Joseph N. Teal in just 10 days in September. Could Richmond do better? On Sunday, November 8th, at 1 minute past midnight, workers laid the keel for the SS Robert E. Peary. The shipyard operated around the clock. Prefabricated sections, hull plates, deck beams, bulkheads, all welded together in advance, arrived by railroad from assembly facilities across California. Cranes lifted the sections into place. Welders worked in teams, never stopping. Supply chains had been coordinated so that every piece arrived exactly when needed. It was a publicity stunt designed to demonstrate American capability and boost worker morale. But it was also a genuine display of what systematic organization could achieve. 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after the keel was laid, on Thursday, November 12th, the Robert E. Peary slid down the ways into San Francisco Bay. 250,000 parts, weighing 14 million pounds, assembled into a functional 441-foot ship in less than 5 days. The record made headlines across America. Newsreels showed the launch to audiences in packed theaters. The message was clear. The United States could build ships faster than they could be sunk, much faster. German intelligence received reports of the Peary's construction time. The reports were filed away as obvious propaganda. Nobody builds a ship in 5 days. The numbers had to be falsified for morale purposes. Real shipbuilding didn't work that way, except it did. The Robert E. Peary was fitted out with equipment and paint over the following week, and on November 22nd, just 14 days after her keel was laid, she departed San Francisco, loaded with war supplies for the Pacific Theater. She would spend the next 3 years carrying cargo across the Pacific and Atlantic, participating in the Normandy landings, surviving constant U-boat threat, and proving that mass-produced ships could be as durable as traditionally built vessels. The Peary's record was never meant to be repeated. It required too much coordination and resources to build every ship that fast, but it proved the principle. American shipyards had fundamentally changed the economics of the tonnage war. By 1943, Kaiser's yards were building a Liberty ship every 42 days on average. Multiply that across 18 shipyards, and the United States was launching more than 3 ships daily, every single day, month after month. The average Liberty ship cost $1.8 million and required 500,000 man-hours to build. After a single voyage, just one crossing of the Atlantic, a Liberty ship had paid for itself in strategic value. Everything after that was profit. Admiral Dönitz needed to sink 700,000 tons per month to win the tonnage war. In 1942, his U-boats came close, peaking at 650,000 tons in November. But by mid-1943, American shipyards were producing over 1 million tons of new shipping monthly. Even accounting for British and Canadian production, Allied capacity exceeded German destruction by a factor of 3. The mathematics had reversed. For every ship Dönitz's submarines sank, the Allies built 3 replacements. The tonnage war wasn't sustainable. It had never been sustainable. But German naval intelligence wouldn't accept the numbers until convoy battles made the truth undeniable. Hess, still hunting HX-239 in March of 1943, positioned U-995 for a night surface attack. His torpedoes struck 2 freighters, both of which sank quickly. From his perspective, it was a successful patrol. 2 ships destroyed, 20,000 tons sent to the bottom, a blow against Allied logistics. What he couldn't know was that on the same day he sank those 2 ships, American shipyards launched 5 new Liberty ships. By the time he returned to port in Lorient 3 weeks later, another 70 Liberty ships had been built and launched. The war had become a race that Germany couldn't win, and most U-boat commanders still didn't know they were losing. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The War Room at U-boat Headquarters in Paris, May 19th, 1943. Admiral Karl Dönitz stood before a large map of the North Atlantic, studying the colored pins that marked U-boat positions and convoy routes. Around him, his staff officers waited in uncomfortable silence. The numbers from April had just been compiled. 15 U-boats lost, 98 Allied merchant ships sunk, totaling 235,000 tons. On the surface, the exchange seemed acceptable. Each U-boat lost had accounted for approximately 6 ships before going down. But Dönitz understood submarine warfare better than anyone in the German Navy. He'd commanded U-boats in the First World War. He'd spent 20 years developing wolfpack tactics, and he could read between the lines of the operational reports his commanders were sending back. Something had changed in the Atlantic. The convoys weren't just better defended, they were different. Escort carriers now accompanied major convoys, providing air cover that U-boats couldn't evade. Radar had improved to the point where surfaced submarines could be detected at night. Depth charges had become more powerful and more numerous. Worse, the convoys themselves seemed larger. In 1941, a typical Atlantic convoy consisted of 30 to 40 merchant ships. Now, they were routinely fielding 50, 60, sometimes 70 vessels. Even when U-boat wolfpacks achieved tactical success and sank 5 or 6 ships, the convoys kept coming, as large as before, sometimes larger. Dönitz's intelligence staff attributed this to better convoy organization. Ships were being gathered more efficiently, they suggested. Sailing schedules were more coordinated. But Dönitz had a growing suspicion that something else was happening, something the intelligence estimates hadn't captured. "How many ships?" he asked his operations officer. "Do we estimate the Americans are currently building per month?" The officer consulted his notes. 40 to 50 Liberty ships, Herr Gross Admiral, perhaps 60 at peak production. Combined with British and Canadian output, we estimate total Allied production at approximately 400,000 tons monthly. Dönitz did the mathematics in his head. His U-boats had sunk 235,000 tons in April. If the Allies were building 400,000 tons, then Germany was falling behind by over 150,000 tons per month. That was troubling, but not catastrophic. The convoy battles could still be won if tactics improved, if more U-boats entered service, if the Luftwaffe provided better reconnaissance. What Dönitz didn't know, what his intelligence staff couldn't tell him because they didn't believe the numbers themselves, was that American shipyards had produced 112 Liberty ships in April alone. Not 40, not 50, not even 60. 112. The intelligence estimate was off by more than 100%. Kapitän-Leutnant Werner Henke commanded U-515, one of the most successful boats in the Atlantic Fleet. In 15 months of operations, he'd sunk 26 Allied ships, totaling over 140,000 tons. He was a skilled commander, aggressive but not reckless, with an intuitive understanding of convoy tactics. In June of 1943, Henke was assigned to patrol the Central Atlantic, southwest of the Azores, hunting convoys traveling between the United States and Gibraltar. His orders were standard: locate convoys, report their position to headquarters, coordinate with other U-boats for wolfpack attacks, strike at night when possible. On June 14th, U-515's radar operator detected a large convoy approximately 30 miles to the northeast. Henke brought the boat to periscope depth and observed the formation. 42 merchant ships, he counted, arranged in columns with destroyer escorts on the flanks and a small escort carrier in the center. It was a tempting target, but the carrier made a surface attack too dangerous. Henke radioed the convoy's position to headquarters and shadowed it from a distance, waiting for other U-boats to arrive for a coordinated strike. Over the next 8 hours, 3 more U-boats joined him. Together, they planned a nighttime attack, Two boats would create a diversion on the convoy's western flank, while Henke and the fourth boat attacked from the east. The tactics had worked before. The escorts would be drawn to the diversion, leaving gaps in the screen that the eastern boats could exploit. The attack began at 2200 hours. The diversion worked perfectly. The two western U-boats fired spreads of torpedoes, struck two freighters, and dived deep as the escorts converged on them. Henke brought U-515 to the surface and raced toward the convoy's eastern edge. But something was wrong. Instead of gaps in the escort screen, Henke found more destroyers. The convoy wasn't just defended on the flanks, it had escorts distributed throughout the formation. When he fired his torpedoes at a tanker, 3 destroyers immediately turned toward him. U-515 crash-dived, but the depth charges began falling before she reached safe depth. The attack continued for 40 minutes. Henke took the boat deep, rigged for silent running, and waited for the escorts to lose contact. When he finally surfaced 3 hours later, the convoy was gone, and U-515 had sustained minor damage from near-miss depth charges. The patrol report Henke filed when he returned to base described the incident in detail. His conclusion troubled the operations staff. Enemy convoy defense has improved significantly. Escorts appear more numerous and better coordinated than previous patrols encountered. Even successful attacks now result in severe counterattack. Similar reports were coming from other commanders. The convoys weren't just better defended, there seemed to be more of them, and each one was larger than before. German intelligence struggled to explain it. Perhaps the Allies were running convoys more frequently. Perhaps they were consolidating shipping to create larger formations. The real explanation was simpler and more damaging to German strategy. The convoys were larger because the Americans were building so many ships that they could field bigger formations without reducing sailing frequency. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By July of 1943, the scope of American production was becoming impossible for U-boat commanders to ignore, even if they didn't understand the full scale. Henke, hunting convoys off the African coast, encountered a formation of 68 merchant ships, the largest convoy he'd ever seen. His wolf pack managed to sink 4 vessels, but the convoy's size meant that losing 4 ships barely disrupted its operational capacity. In his patrol report, Henke wrote with obvious frustration, "The enemy appears to have an inexhaustible supply of merchant vessels. Even when attacks succeed, the overall strength of Allied shipping seems unchanged. We are not winning the tonnage war." The comment was censored before the report was distributed to other commanders. Morale was considered more important than uncomfortable truths. Dönitz, however, couldn't ignore what the operational reports were showing. In May of 1943, his U-boats had lost 41 submarines, while sinking only 58 merchant ships, totaling 264,000 tons. The exchange rate had become catastrophic. Nearly 1 U-boat lost for every ship sunk. He made the hardest decision of his career. On May 24th, he ordered U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic temporarily. The convoy routes would be conceded while U-boats were refitted with improved radar detectors and acoustic homing torpedoes. It was meant to be a tactical pause, a chance to regroup and adapt to improved Allied defenses, but Dönitz knew what it really meant. The tonnage war was failing. The Americans and British were building ships faster than Germany could sink them, and the U-boat losses required to maintain even reduced sinking rates were unsustainable. In his private diary that night, Dönitz wrote, "We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic. The enemy's shipbuilding capacity exceeds all previous estimates. Their merchant fleet grows even as we sink their ships. We cannot destroy tonnage faster than they construct it." It was the first time a senior German naval officer had officially acknowledged what frontline U-boat commanders were increasingly reporting. The mathematical foundation of the tonnage war had been wrong from the beginning. Oberleutnant zur See, Friedrich Guggenberger, commanded U-513, operating off the coast of Brazil in July of 1943. He was one of the more thoughtful U-boat commanders, known for keeping detailed personal notes about his patrols. Unlike official reports, which maintained morale through optimism, Guggenberger's private writings reveal what experienced commanders were really thinking. On July 28th, U-513 torpedoed and sank a Liberty ship identified as the Thomas Sully approximately 200 miles east of Santos, Brazil. The ship went down quickly, taking most of her cargo of steel and machinery with her. From a tactical perspective, it was a clean kill, but Guggenberger's diary entry that night expresses something other than satisfaction. Another Liberty ship destroyed. The crew abandoned quickly. They are well trained now, these American merchant sailors. The ship herself was unremarkable. Simple construction, welded plates, no elegance. A worker's ship, built for function, not form. But that is precisely what makes them so dangerous. We sank this ship, yes, but how long did it take to build? How many of them exist? When we sank British freighters early in the war, each one represented months or years of construction, skilled craftsmen, limited shipyard capacity. These American ships feel different, disposable, almost, built quickly and in quantity. I cannot escape the feeling that we are fighting the wrong enemy. The real opponent is not the Allied navies or the convoy escorts, but American factories, and those we cannot torpedo. Guggenberger's observation captured something essential about the strategic situation. The war in the Atlantic had become a contest between German tactical skill and American industrial capacity. And in that contest, tactical skill couldn't compensate for overwhelming material superiority. The Liberty ships themselves provided evidence of American production methods that German naval officers found difficult to believe. When U-boats sank Liberty ships and examined the wreckage or questioned survivors, they noticed construction details that seemed impossible under traditional shipbuilding methods. The hulls were entirely welded, no rivets anywhere. The plates were flat rather than curved, reducing fabrication complexity. The engines were simple reciprocating designs rather than modern turbines. The entire ship seemed designed for rapid assembly rather than performance or longevity. German engineers who examined captured plans and photographs couldn't understand how such crude construction methods produced seaworthy vessels. The welded hulls should have been prone to cracking. The flat plates should have created structural weaknesses. The old-fashioned engines should have been unreliable. But the Liberty ships worked. They crossed the Atlantic, loaded with supplies. They survived rough seas and enemy attacks. They accomplished their mission despite seeming unfit for purpose. What German analysts missed was that the Liberty ship's apparent crudeness was actually brilliant engineering focused on a single goal: buildability. Every design choice sacrificed elegance for speed of construction. The ships didn't need to be fast or beautiful or advanced. They needed to be built quickly and carry cargo. Everything else was secondary. This philosophy was incomprehensible to German naval tradition, which emphasized quality, craftsmanship, and technological sophistication. German U-boats were masterpieces of engineering, complex, capable, built to exacting standards by skilled workers. Each one took months to construct and represented a significant investment of resources and expertise. The Americans had chosen quantity over quality, and in a war of attrition, quantity was winning. In September of 1943, Dönitz received an intelligence briefing that finally captured the full scope of American production. The report was based on multiple sources: aerial reconnaissance of American ports, interrogation of prisoners of war, signals intelligence, and analysis of Allied shipping movements. The conclusions were stunning. American shipyards were producing approximately 100 Liberty ships per month, along with dozens of other vessel types. Combined Allied production exceeded 1.5 million tons of new shipping monthly, more than 3 times the previous German estimates. The report projected that by the end of 1943, the United States alone would have built over 1,700 Liberty ships since the program began. Total Allied merchant shipping tonnage was increasing not decreasing, despite sustained U-boat attacks. Dönitz shared the report with his senior staff. The meeting was brief. There was little to discuss. The numbers spoke for themselves. If these estimates are correct, his operations officer said carefully, then we would need to sink over 1 million tons per month just to prevent the Allied merchant fleet from growing. To reduce their tonnage significantly would require sinking nearly 2 million tons monthly. The implications were clear. At the height of U-boat effectiveness, in November of 1942, German submarines had sunk 650,000 tons, nowhere near the required level, and that had been before convoy defenses improved, before escort carriers became common, before the Allies had broken German naval codes. Current sinking rates were running around 300,000 tons per month. The Allies were building 5 times that amount. The tonnage war, and Dönitz said quietly, was lost before it began. We simply didn't know it. One of the most revealing documents about German naval officers' understanding of American production comes from a post-war interrogation of Fregattenkapitän Günther Hessler, who served as Dönitz's staff operations officer throughout the war. Hessler had access to all intelligence reports and operational data. If anyone in the U-boat command understood the true strategic situation, it would have been him. When asked by American interrogators when he realized Germany couldn't win the tonnage war, Hessler's answer was blunt. I think we knew by mid-1943 that Allied production exceeded our sinking capacity, but we didn't understand the full magnitude until late 1944, when we saw actual production figures from American sources. The numbers seemed impossible. Your Liberty ship program alone produced more tonnage in 1 year than our entire merchant marine possessed at the start of the war. We thought this must be propaganda. Then we encountered convoy after convoy, each with dozens of these ships, and we realized the propaganda was simply truth. The psychological impact on U-boat commanders was severe. In the early war years, sinking a merchant ship felt like a strategic victory. One less vessel in the Allied fleet, one more hole in their logistics. By 1944, sinking a ship felt pointless. Tomorrow, there would be 3 more to replace it. We were not fighting a navy, we were fighting an economy, and economies cannot be torpedoed. Hessler's comment about fighting an economy captured the fundamental mismatch at the heart of the tonnage war. Germany's strategy assumed that Allied shipbuilding operated under the same constraints as German industry: limited capacity, specialized labor, extended construction times. The strategy made sense in a world where building ships required traditional methods and where production capacity had natural limits. But the Americans had changed those constraints. They'd industrialized shipbuilding, turning vessels into products that could be mass-produced like automobiles or refrigerators. The closest historical parallel was the American Civil War, when the Union's industrial capacity overwhelmed the Confederacy despite early Southern tactical successes. Numbers eventually overpowered skill. Production defeated courage. The side that could replace losses faster gained an insurmountable advantage. By 1944, U-boat commanders were filing patrol reports that read less like military accounts and more like depressing inventories. Korvettenkapitän Heinz Wilhelm Eck, commanding U-852 in the Indian Ocean, wrote after sinking a Greek freighter in March of 1944. The crew reported that their ship had been built in America only 6 months ago. 6 months from keel to commission. Our own merchant construction programs take 2 to 3 years to produce a vessel of comparable size. The enemy builds ships faster than we can train crews to sink them. Eck's observation highlighted another dimension of the production disparity. Germany wasn't just struggling to match Allied shipbuilding. The entire German economy was operating under resource constraints that limited every aspect of military production. Steel that went into merchant ships couldn't go into tanks or submarines. Workers in shipyards weren't available for aircraft factories. Every choice involved trade-offs. The Americans faced no such constraints. Their economy was large enough to build merchant ships, warships, aircraft, tanks, and everything else simultaneously. The Liberty ship program didn't compete with other military production. it supplemented it. By the time U-boat commanders fully understood the scale of American production, the strategic war was effectively over. U-boats continued operations until May of 1945, but they operated with the knowledge that sinking Allied shipping no longer affected the war's outcome. Convoys would continue, regardless of losses. The invasion of Europe would proceed. Allied logistics would function. Captain José Adalbert Schnee, one of the highest-scoring U-boat aces with 23 ships sunk, was captured in May of 1945 when his boat was forced to surface after depth charge damage. During his interrogation, he made a comment that revealed how thoroughly German naval officers had misunderstood the war they were fighting. "We thought," Schnee said, "that we were waging a naval campaign. We studied convoy tactics, torpedo performance, escort countermeasures. We calculated sinking rates and replacement rates. We believed the Battle of the Atlantic would be won or lost based on tactical excellence and operational efficiency. Only at the end did we understand we weren't fighting a naval war at all. We were fighting American industry, and you can't win a war against factories with submarines. Every ship we sank was replaced by 2 more before we could even return to port. It was hopeless from the beginning. We just didn't know." The statistical reality of the tonnage war tells the story more clearly than any individual account. In 1942, German U-boats sank 1,161 Allied merchant ships, totaling 6.3 million tons. It was the most successful year of the entire war for the U-boat arm. In that same year, American shipyards alone built 746 Liberty ships, along with hundreds of other vessel types. Total Allied production in 1942 exceeded 8 million tons, more than German submarines sank. By 1943, the disparity had widened dramatically. U-boats sank approximately 3.2 million tons, while Allied yards built over 14 million tons. The merchant fleet was growing, not shrinking. In 1944, German sinking rates fell to 1.2 million tons, while Allied production exceeded 16 million tons. The ratio had become absurd. The Allies were building more than 10 tons of shipping for every ton the Germans sank. From 1941 through 1945, American shipyards built 2,710 Liberty ships, totaling 29 million tons. Add other vessel types, and American production exceeded 38 million tons, include British, Canadian, and other Allied production, and the total surpassed 55 million tons. German U-boats, in their most successful period from 1939 through 1945, sank approximately 23 million tons of Allied merchant shipping. They failed to sink more than Allied yards built by a factor of more than 2 to 1. The tonnage war wasn't close. It was a massacre, but the massacred party was Germany. The final irony of the Liberty ship program came in its longevity. These vessels, designed as expendable emergency ships built to last one voyage, proved remarkably durable. Of the 2,710 Liberty ships built, approximately 200 were lost to enemy action during the war, a surprisingly low percentage given the intensity of the U-boat campaign. After the war, many Liberty ships continued commercial service for decades. Some were sold to private shipping companies and operated profitably into the 1960s and 70s. 2, the Jeremiah O'Brien and the John W. Brown, remain operational today as museum ships, capable of sailing under their own power 80 years after construction. The ships that German engineers dismissed as crude emergency vessels outlasted most of the U-boats that hunted them. U-515, commanded by Werner Henke, was sunk by American destroyers in April of 1944. U-513, commanded by Friedrich Guggenberger, was destroyed by American aircraft in July of 1943. U-995, commanded by Hans-Georg Hess at the start of this story, survived the war, but was one of only a handful of U-boats to do so. Of the 859 U-boats that sailed on war patrols, 648 were destroyed. A casualty rate of 75%, the Liberty ships, built quickly and in quantity, survived. The U-boats built carefully with advanced technology, were annihilated. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.